On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747SR, embarked on what should have been a routine domestic flight from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka. It was a popular route, with many passengers traveling to visit family during the Obon holiday. The plane carried 509 passengers and 15 crew members, most of them unaware that this ordinary journey would soon become the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history. The aircraft had been in service for 7 years and was well maintained, or so it seemed. Unbeknownst to the passengers and crew, a critical structural flaw lay hidden within the plane. Years earlier, the aircraft had been repaired following a tail strike incident during landing. The repair was improperly performed, leaving the plane vulnerable to catastrophic failure. Flight 123 departed Haneda at 6:12 p.m. with Captain Masami Takahama, First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, and Flight Engineer Hiroshi Fukuda in command. The crew were seasoned professionals, experienced and well-trained for their roles. The weather was clear, and the initial climb was uneventful. However, just 12 minutes into the flight, everything changed. At 6:24 p.m., as the plane ascended to cruising altitude, a loud explosion shook the cabin. The sudden decompression caused the tail section of the plane to rip apart, severing hydraulic lines critical for controlling the aircraft. Passengers heard the deafening roar of wind as oxygen masks deployed, and the plane began to shudder violently. Panic quickly spread as the crew struggled to regain control. The loss of hydraulics was catastrophic. In modern aircraft, hydraulics are essential for steering, stabilizing, and maneuvering. Without them, the crew's ability to control the massive Boeing 747 was severely compromised. Despite their best efforts, the plane entered a series of oscillations, banking left and right uncontrollably. For the next 32 minutes, the crew fought valiantly to keep the plane aloft. They used engine thrust to try to steer the aircraft, a near impossible task under such conditions. Passengers on board wrote farewell notes to loved ones, aware of the impending disaster. The chaos inside the cabin was matched by the desperate attempts of the crew to communicate with air traffic control and find a safe place to land. At 6:56 p.m., Flight 123 crashed into Mount Takamagahara, a remote forested area northwest of Tokyo. The impact shattered the aircraft, igniting fires that consumed much of the wreckage. Of the 524 people on board, only 4 survived, 2 women and 2 young girls, who were found hours later in the twisted remains of the fuselage. The aftermath of the crash was devastating. Rescue teams faced difficult terrain and thick fog as they searched for survivors. Critically, a delay in deploying rescue operations may have cost additional lives. Some experts believe that more passengers could have survived if help had arrived sooner. The investigation into the disaster revealed a chilling truth. The cause of the crash was traced back to the improper repair of the rear pressure bulkhead following the tail strike incident years earlier. The repair had been done using a single row of rivets instead of the required double row, leaving the bulkhead unable to withstand the repeated pressurization cycles of normal flight. Over time, this flaw weakened the structure until it gave way on Flight 123. The findings shocked the aviation industry. How could such a critical repair have been botched? How had the error gone unnoticed for so long? The answers pointed to systemic failures in oversight and quality control. In response, Japan Airlines implemented sweeping changes to its maintenance practices, and stricter regulations for aircraft repairs were adopted worldwide. Despite these changes, the tragedy left an indelible mark on Japan. The loss of so many lives, many of them families returning home for the holiday, shattered communities, and brought national mourning. Memorials were established near the crash site, and every year, families and loved ones gather to remember those who perished. The story of Flight 123 is as much about human resilience as it is about loss. The bravery of the crew, who fought to control the plane against impossible odds, is a testament to their dedication and skill. Captain Takahama and his team never gave up, even as the situation became increasingly dire. Their efforts likely saved lives by delaying the crash long enough for some passengers to survive. For the survivors, the ordeal left physical and emotional scars. The 4 who lived through the crash were hailed as miracles, but they also carried the weight of immense grief and trauma. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the human cost of aviation disasters. Today, the tragedy of Japan Airlines Flight 123 is remembered as a turning point in aviation safety. The lessons learned from this accident prompted significant advancements in aircraft maintenance standards, repair protocols, and emergency response systems. These changes have undoubtedly saved countless lives in the decades since, but for those who lost loved ones that day, the pain remains. Flight 123 is a sobering example of how seemingly small errors can have catastrophic consequences. It's a reminder of the human element in aviation, both its flaws and its incredible strength. And it's a tribute to the passengers, crew, and survivors whose lives were forever changed on that fateful summer evening in 1985. On January 31st, 2000, Alaska Airlines Flight 261 took off from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, heading to Seattle with a stop planned in San Francisco. It was supposed to be a normal flight, with 83 passengers and 5 crew members on board. They were expecting just a few hours in the air before reaching home or their destinations. But what started as a routine trip turned into one of the most tragic stories in aviation history. Flight 261 was flying over the Pacific Ocean, about 40 miles northwest of Los Angeles, when the pilots noticed a problem. Something was wrong with the horizontal stabilizer, a part of the plane's tail that helps it go up or down. At first, it didn't seem too serious. The pilots, Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky, were very experienced. Captain Thompson had flown over 17,000 hours, and First Officer Tansky had nearly 8,000 hours under his belt. They followed all the steps they'd been trained to take, trying to fix the problem. But this wasn't a simple issue. The trouble was with the jack screw assembly, a device in the tail of the plane that controls the stabilizer. Over time, the jack screw had worn down because it hadn't been properly greased. This wear and tear was hidden and unnoticed, but it was enough to start a chain reaction of problems. As the pilots worked to keep the plane steady, the stabilizer got stuck and forced the plane's nose downward.
Center Alaska 261, we are in a dive here.
Alaska 261, say again?
Vertical pitch.
Alaska 261, say again, sir?
Yeah, we're at 26,000 feet. We are in a vertical dive. Not a dive yet, but we've lost vertical control of our airplane.
Alaska 261, roger.
We're at 23.7, request, yeah, we got it back under control there. Oh, yeah.
For a moment, they were able to level it out again, but the situation was getting worse. Passengers could feel it too. The smooth flight turned into a terrifying drop as the plane started to dive sharply toward the ocean. The plane entered another steep dive, spinning as it headed for the ocean. People on boats below saw the aircraft plummet, trailing smoke before crashing into the water. The impact was devastating, and sadly, no one survived. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves around the world. Families of the victims were left with unimaginable grief, mourning their loved ones while trying to come to terms with the horrifying way the flight ended. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board worked hard to figure out what went wrong so that such a tragedy wouldn't happen again. Their findings were heartbreaking. The jack screw failure could have been avoided. Maintenance records showed that Alaska Airlines had stretched out the time between greasing the part, trying to save money. This decision turned out to be deadly. The airline faced intense criticism, and new rules were put in place to ensure this kind of neglect could never happen again. But beyond the technical reasons, What people remember most about this story are the human aspects. The bravery of the pilots, who kept trying to save everyone until the very end. The fear and pain of the passengers, and the captain's calm voice over the radio, even as he faced the impossible. Today, there's a memorial in Port Hueneme, California, near the crash site. It honors the 88 lives lost and serves as a reminder of how fragile life is and the heavy cost of cutting corners in safety. This story is tragic, but it also teaches an important lesson. It shows us why paying attention to safety and doing the right thing matters so much. While we'll always remember the loss of Flight 261, it also stands as a warning, a reminder to learn from the past and work toward a safer future for everyone. On October 31, 1979, Western Airlines Flight 2605 took off from Los Angeles International Airport on its way to Mexico City. It was an early morning flight, carrying 88 passengers and 11 crew members, most of them looking forward to a trip south of the border. For many, it was supposed to be the start of a vacation or a routine business trip. But in the darkness of Mexico City's airport that morning, a series of errors would turn this flight into a heartbreaking tragedy. As the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 approached Mexico City, everything seemed normal. The crew was experienced, with Captain Charles Gilbert, a seasoned pilot with thousands of hours of flight time. The flight itself had been smooth, and there was no indication of trouble as the plane descended toward its destination. But hidden in the routine was a critical mistake. The runway they had been cleared to land on was closed for maintenance. To make matters worse, visibility was poor due to early morning fog, which is common in Mexico City during that time of year. The crew had been given clearance to land, but they were not fully aware that their assigned runway was unavailable. Instead, they unknowingly lined up for the wrong runway, one that was closed and filled with construction equipment. As the plane descended, the crew relied on their instruments to guide them. But the lack of clear communication about the runway closure set the stage for disaster. The flight continued its approach, and in the early hours of the morning, with visibility still low, the DC-10 touched down, not on a clear and safe runway, but on the one filled with hazards. The result was catastrophic. The plane collided with construction vehicles on the closed runway, sending debris flying and tearing apart parts of the aircraft. In the chaos, the plane veered off the runway and struck a building, further compounding the destruction. Fire broke out as the plane came to a stop, engulfing parts of the wreckage in flames. Inside the cabin, panic erupted. Passengers scrambled to escape the smoke and fire, many trying desperately to find a way out. For the crew, the moments after the crash were a desperate fight to save lives. Despite their efforts, 72 people lost their lives in the crash, including passengers, crew, and 2 workers on the ground. The aftermath was devastating. Survivors described the scene as chaotic, with flames and thick smoke making it nearly impossible to see or breathe. Rescue teams arrived quickly, pulling survivors from the wreckage and rushing them to nearby hospitals. For the families of those who didn't make it, the grief was unimaginable, made worse by the knowledge that the tragedy could have been prevented. When investigators began looking into what happened, the answers were both frustrating and sobering. The root cause was a failure in communication and coordination. The air traffic controllers had cleared the flight to land without properly informing the crew that the runway was closed. At the same time, the foggy conditions and the lack of clear runway markings made it difficult for the pilots to recognize the mistake before it was too late. The investigation also revealed that procedures for dealing with runway closures at Mexico City's airport were not as strict as they should have been. This raised serious concerns about safety, not just at that airport, but across the aviation industry. Changes were made after the crash, including stricter rules for runway closures and improved communication between air traffic controllers and pilots. But even with these changes, the tragedy of Western Airlines Flight 2605 remains a haunting reminder of how small mistakes can lead to enormous consequences. It wasn't just about the closed runway or the fog. it was a combination of factors, each one compounding the other, that ultimately led to the disaster. Today, the story of Flight 2605 is remembered as a case study in the importance of clear communication and strict safety protocols. It also highlights the bravery of those who survived, the rescuers who risked their lives, and the heartbreaking loss of those who didn't make it. For the aviation industry, the lessons learned from this crash have undoubtedly saved lives in the years since. But for the families and loved ones of the 72 people who died that day, the pain never truly fades. It's a story of what can go wrong when details are overlooked, and a somber reminder that in aviation, there is no room for error. On the morning of February 19, 1989, Flying Tiger Line Flight 66 departed Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, bound for Singapore's Changi Airport. The aircraft, a Boeing 747-200F freighter, carried 4 crew members and a load of cargo. As part of Flying Tiger Line's extensive cargo operations, this flight was just another link in a global supply chain, moving goods across borders. But what began as a routine flight ended in disaster, leaving a trail of devastation and raising critical questions about aviation safety. The flight crew of Flight 66 was experienced and well-trained, accustomed to the challenges of flying a massive freighter. The captain, first officer, flight engineer, and a loadmaster were on board, managing the aircraft and its cargo. The journey from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore was short, less than an hour in the air, but the weather along the route presented an obstacle. Heavy thunderstorms had developed near Singapore, creating low visibility and hazardous conditions for the approach. As the plane neared Changi Airport, the crew prepared for landing on runway 02 left. Air traffic control provided instructions, and the crew followed them, relying on both their instruments and communication with the tower. However, as they descended, the challenging weather conditions began to take their toll. The thick storm clouds and heavy rain limited visibility, making it difficult for the crew to visually assess their surroundings.
So you got... So you got the ILS there, right? Yeah. I'm going to put you on 14.7. That'll give you... Oh, I got 100 feet on the shit.
What unfolded next was a tragic series of errors and misjudgments. In their attempt to land, the crew relied heavily on the aircraft's instruments as the storm obscured their view of the runway. This reliance, combined with the stress of flying in such challenging conditions, led to a critical miscalculation. The aircraft was not aligned properly with the runway. Instead, it was descending toward a wooded area several miles short of its intended landing spot. In the final moments before impact, there was little time for the crew to react. The massive Boeing 747 crashed into a hillside near the town of Johor Bahru, Malaysia, just short of the Singapore border. The collision was devastating, tearing the aircraft apart and scattering debris across the dense forest. All 4 crew members aboard Flight 66 lost their lives instantly. The aftermath of the crash was both heartbreaking and sobering. Investigators from Malaysia and Singapore, along with representatives from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, quickly arrived at the crash site to determine what had gone wrong. What they found highlighted the complex and sometimes fragile interplay of human decisions, weather conditions, and technology in aviation. The investigation revealed that the primary cause of the crash was controlled flight into terrain, a term used to describe incidents where an airworthy aircraft is unintentionally flown into the ground, water, or an obstacle. In this case, the crew had inadvertently flown the aircraft into a hillside due to a misjudgment of their descent path. Contributing factors included the severe weather conditions, which reduced visibility and heightened stress levels, as well as potential lapses in communication and situational awareness. One of the key findings was that the aircraft's ground proximity warning system, which is designed to alert pilots when they are dangerously close to the ground, had not been as effective as it could have been. This led to renewed calls for advancements in such systems, as well as more robust training for pilots to handle CFIT scenarios. The tragedy of Flight 66 had far-reaching implications for the aviation industry. It underscored the importance of better weather forecasting, improved communication between pilots and air traffic controllers, and more advanced technology to prevent accidents. Airlines around the world took notice, implementing stricter protocols for flights operating in adverse weather and investing in enhanced navigation and warning systems. For the families of the crew, however, these changes came too late. The loss of their loved ones was a stark reminder of the risks that aviation professionals face every day. The cargo industry, often operating behind the scenes of passenger travel, rarely garners the same level of public attention. But Flight 66's crash highlighted that every flight, whether carrying passengers or cargo, relies on a delicate balance of skill, technology, and conditions to ensure safety. Today, the story of Flying Tiger Line Flight 66 serves as a cautionary tale. It reminds us of the importance of vigilance and adaptability in aviation, particularly in challenging environments. It also highlights the bravery and dedication of flight crews, who work tirelessly to overcome obstacles and ensure safe journeys. The memory of Flight 66's crew lives on, not just in the hearts of their families, but also in the lessons learned from their tragic flight. Their sacrifice helped pave the way for advancements in aviation safety, ensuring that future flights could avoid similar fates. As we remember the events of that stormy February morning, we're reminded that aviation, for all its technological wonders, remains deeply human. Behind every flight is a team of individuals making decisions in real time, often under immense pressure. And while not every tragedy can be prevented, every loss teaches us how to make the skies safer for those who follow. On August 2, 1985, Delta Airlines Flight 191 departed Fort Lauderdale, Florida, bound for Los Angeles with a scheduled stop in Dallas, Fort Worth International Airport. The flight carried 152 passengers and 11 crew members, with its McDonnell Douglas L-1011 TriStar being one of the most reliable aircraft of its time. For most passengers, it was just another routine flight. But as the plane approached Dallas, Fort Worth, it encountered a weather phenomenon that would turn this journey into one of the most infamous accidents in aviation history. The first leg of the trip was uneventful. The experienced crew, led by Captain Edward Connors, First Officer Rudolph Price, and Flight Engineer Nick Nassick, had thousands of flight hours between them. They were confident and well prepared for the job ahead. However, as the aircraft neared Dallas, Fort Worth for its descent, a series of thunderstorms had developed near the airport. Thunderstorms are common in Texas during the summer, and the crew was aware of the weather. However, they underestimated the severity of the conditions they were about to face. As the plane descended, it encountered a microburst, a powerful and sudden downdraft of air caused by thunderstorms. Microbursts were not widely understood at the time, making them a particularly dangerous threat to aviation. As Flight 191 approached runway 17L, everything seemed normal at first. The crew communicated with air traffic control, received landing clearance, and began their final descent. But as they entered the microburst, the plane was hit by a wall of rapidly changing wind patterns. These shifts caused the aircraft to first gain altitude unexpectedly, and then lose it just as quickly. The crew fought to stabilize the plane, but the microburst's downward force was too strong. The aircraft began to sink rapidly, and within moments it struck the ground about a mile short of the runway. The initial impact tore through a car on a nearby highway, killing its occupant, and the plane then skidded across the ground, breaking apart and bursting into flames as it collided with water tanks near the airport. The crash was devastating. Of the 163 people on board, 137 lost their lives, including Captain Connors and most of the crew. Survivors described the scene as chaotic and horrifying, with flames engulfing the wreckage and smoke making it nearly impossible to breathe. Many of those who escaped the crash owed their lives to quick-thinking rescuers who rushed to the scene to pull passengers from the burning debris. In the aftermath, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board launched an in-depth investigation to determine what had gone wrong. The primary cause was identified as the microburst, which created conditions that overwhelmed the aircraft's ability to recover. The investigation also revealed that weather radar technology at the time was not sophisticated enough to detect microbursts accurately, leaving the crew without critical information about the danger ahead. The crash of Flight 191 became a turning point in aviation safety. It highlighted the urgent need to understand and mitigate the dangers of wind shear and microbursts. As a direct result, the aviation industry invested heavily in research and technology to improve weather detection. Wind shear warning systems were developed and installed in aircraft and at airports. Pilot training programs were also updated to better prepare crews for handling such conditions. The crash also raised questions about communication and decision-making. Some wondered if the flight could have been diverted or delayed due to the thunderstorms. The tragedy underscored the importance of prioritizing safety over schedules, a principle that has since become a cornerstone of aviation culture. For the families of the victims, these improvements were little consolation. The loss of their loved ones was a painful reminder of how quickly a routine flight could turn tragic. Memorials were created to honor those who lost their lives, ensuring that their memory would not be forgotten. Flight 191 is remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for change. The lessons learned from the accident have saved countless lives by making the skies safer for everyone. It's a reminder of the unpredictable power of nature and the need for constant vigilance in the face of evolving challenges. The story of Flight 191 is both heartbreaking and instructive. It highlights the bravery of the crew, who did everything in their power to save their passengers, and the resilience of the survivors, who endured unimaginable terror and loss. It also serves as a testament to the aviation industry's commitment to learning from the past to prevent future tragedies. As we look back on that fateful day in 1985, we're reminded of the fragility of life and the importance of progress. The crash of Flight 191 was a wake-up call, but it also became a turning point, a moment when the industry came together to ensure that such a disaster would never happen again. While the pain of those who lost loved ones can never be erased, their legacy lives on in the safer skies we enjoy today.